Hello. Wait for a couple more viewers this morning. Do you ever go to sleep and it's like all the. I feel like I was laying on this side last night and I think all the fluid in my body kind of just went like to that side. And so when I woke up, this eye was all puffy, or extra puffy, I should say. Just, I think, because of laying on that side. Um, and it's taking a while for it to drain. Okay, I'm at 18 people, so I'm going to go ahead and get started. So today what I'm going to be teaching you guys about is a graphing API. And so if you wanted to include a graph or a chart of some kind, so this API has the ability to do pie charts, bar charts, scatter charts, all kinds of different charts. So you could use those to represent data if you wanted to. So I just wanted to teach you how to do that. And this is also good practice in using APIs that are sort of beyond the standard Java library. Okay? So I'm going to start off just showing you. So I was searching last week online how to what's a good API for creating charts, and so the one that I thought was probably easiest for us to use was let me see, is called JFreeChart. Okay, so I played around with a couple different ones, and this is the one I thought was the simplest. So so you can download it. Here's a link to where you could download it. And then basically there is a folder called library. Okay. And it has some jar files. Okay, so we have to deal with jar files again. And you have to add these two jar files, to your class path. So just like you did last time for the email sender, there are two jar files that include all of the extra classes that are not part of the standard Java library. So there are instructions here on how to do that, but really it's just the same as last time. You're just adding these two jar files to the class path using the exact same commands. So you would do Java C space dash class path, and then you would type in this colon this, and then your file. Okay, and then this website is just some random tutorial website that I found. There's a lot of Java tutorial websites, but it has, kind of a summary of all the different types of graphs you can make. It has example code, pie chart, bar chart, line chart, scatter chart, bubble chart. I don't even know what a bubble chart is. Time series chart, and a Gantt chart. If you don't know what a Gantt chart is, it's used in scheduling. Another thing I wanted to show you is there's also an API, summarizing all of the classes for JFreeChart. So this is at JFree.org. So that's the website where all of the information about all the capabilities of JFreeChart is held. So that's a useful thing to take a look at. All right, so I'm going to check for questions here. All right, only 21 people watching. Let me see if I'm getting any remind messages that say, "Where are you? Why aren't you in the Zoom room?" I don't have any messages. Okay. I guess just people are sleepy today. So now I'm going to go to some Java code that I. So this code, it's partially I wrote it, and then partially, partially it's from one of the examples. I kind of changed it quite a bit, but kind of did it in my own style. So there's some import statements. So there's a JFreeChart package, and so I'm importing all of the stuff that I need for the code that I wrote. Okay. How do you know which import statements you need? That's a good question. So how do I know that I need, for example, this first import statement? Well, anytime I'm using a capability, so see how I have chart factory dot create scatterplot. So if we go over to the documentation for this, and I type in chart factory, I can see that the class chart factory is stored in this, this package. Okay, so I have to include that package in my code. So you can see org.jfree.chart.chartFactory. So when I go over here, you can see that I have that exact same import statement. Okay, so this is how I know what import statements to use. Another way you could figure it out is, you could just not have any import statements and then try to compile the code, and it'll let you know what stuff it doesn't recognize. The compiler will let you know. It'll say it doesn't recognize symbol chart factory, and then you can go back and you can look at at the documentation and see which package has chart factory and then import that. Okay. So I have a public class scatterplot example. So I'm going to be making a scatterplot that extends JFrame. So basically, remember JFrame is the Java class for a window. So basically, we're going to make a window with a scatterplot in it. Okay. So that's our goal. So then I have public scatterplot example with that accepts a string title. So this is the constructor. Oops. This is the constructor for this class. Okay. And so the very first statement I have is super of title. So just to remind you, when you call super in a constructor, that is going to call the superclasses constructor. So this is actually calling, in line 12 here, I'm calling JFrames constructor, okay? And JFrames constructor takes in a title, which is just the title of the window, okay? So all this first line in the constructor is doing is just making a JFrame with the title that I want, okay? Now, we also have a data set, okay? So XY data set. There are different types of data sets in JFreeChart, okay? And so let me pull up the documentation here. I think probably the tutorial would be best for this. Let's see. So here is the tutorial. So you can see how there are different, there are XY series. Let's see if this loads. So the XY series class represents a sequence of basically ordered pairs. And so that's what a scatter chart does, or a scatter plot has. But there are different types of ways that you can store the data. And you can look at that by exploring this tutorial. But there's a time series, for example, which would be data as a function of time specifically. So there are some different, so here you have a time series type data is period, time period, and a value associated with that time period, etc. Okay, so I have a scatter chart which is just X and Y coordinates. So that's why I created a data set of the type XY data set. Okay? So now I'm going to create my chart. So a JFreeChart called chart. And to create the chart, you use this class called chart factory dot create, and then whatever type of plot you want to make. Okay, so let's take a look at chart factory and just try to understand it. I'm switching between windows here. So I have chart factory here. Chart factory has a lot of methods. So you can see create area chart, create bubble chart, create box and whisker chart, create Gantt chart, create histogram, create line chart. So I can't even remember what I was making. I think I was create polar chart. Let's see. I'm creating a scatter plot, aren't I? So here's create scatter plot. Okay. So you can see that creating a scatter plot, the first thing is the title of the scatter plot. The second thing is what is the label on the x-axis. The third thing is what is the label on the y-axis. the fourth thing is the data set. So you have to feed in the data set. So you see how it's an XY data set. So that's how you would know, depending on the type of chart you want to make. That's how I knew that this has to be declared as an XY data set. Does that make sense? Okay, so going back to this. Then there's the orientation. Then there's a Boolean, which if this is true, it's going to show the legend. If it's false, it's not going to show the legend. Then there's a Boolean. If it's true, it's going to show tips. If it's false, it's not going to show tips. And then URL, it's going to show URL, but that's irrelevant. So if I go back to my code, you can see I go through all of that. Okay, so first I create, this should say scatter plot. And I'm going to call my chart position time graphs. I'm also a physics teacher, so I'm thinking in terms of physics types graphs. And then on the x-axis, that's the horizontal axis, I'm going to put time in seconds. On the y-axis, I'm going to put position in meters. Okay. And then I have the data set, so I'm adding the data set. Notice how I haven't actually put in any data into the data set yet. So I will do that later on. And then there's just those last four arguments. So plot orientation dot vertical. You can make your plot orientation vertical or horizontal, so you can basically flip the axes. So I made it vertical. I am choosing to include the legend, and then these other ones are almost always going to be false. Okay? So, So then what I do, so we're going through the constructor here. This is where the constructor ends. So let's end constructor. So then what I do is I make a panel, a J panel, which is a new chart panel containing the chart. So, okay, so let's try to understand this. A chart panel contains a chart, which contains a data set. Okay, so because of the structure of the way this code was written, that's how you would do it. So if you recall with JFrame, the way that JFrame works is you have to set the content pane to a certain panel. And then if you have a panel, you can add other panels to that. So, you know, if I wanted to, I could do something where I'm, for example, doing multiple graphs on in a single window. If I had a different panel and then I added chart panels to each of those, you know, you can add chart panels into another panel to make more complicated setups, but I'm just only going to display a single chart. Okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to create the data set. Okay. Now one of the cool things about, so we're done looking at the constructor, and so now we're going to create a data set, because remember, what the heck? Remember, I created this data set here, but I didn't really put any values into it. So now I'm going to put the values into the data set, okay, by defining this method called create data set, okay, and it's going to return an XY data set. So what I have here is an XY series collection called dataset, and it's a new XY series collection. All right. And so what does that mean, a series collection? You can graph multiple sets of data. You ever use Excel or Google Sheets, and you can have series 1 and series 2, and it's two different lines on the same graph. So you have the ability to have multiple lines, okay? So I'm going to have two lines. One of the series, it's an XY series called Series 1, and it's called accelerating, okay? So it's going to represent the position as a function of time for something that is accelerating. Now, and then what I did is I added points. Series 1 dot add, and then the x coordinate is I, and the y coordinate is I times I. Okay, so this would be where you put in the ordered pairs that you want to put in. Maybe the user types that in, but I have it based on a formula. Okay, so basically this is going to look like a parabola because y is equal to x squared. And I just used a loop to initialize that. Then I have to add that series to the data set. So I add series 1. Okay. Then I have series 2, which is representing a constant velocity. It's called constant velocity. And if you know any physics, you know that constant velocity means that it has a linear position time graph. So you have a parabolic position time graph if you're accelerating. You have a linear position time graph if you are at a constant velocity. So I'm adding points that have a linear relationship to one another. And then I'm adding series 2 to the data set, and then I return the data set. So that created the XY data set. Okay? So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my main method, which is pretty much boilerplate. Okay, so boilerplate means it's the same every time. So this won't be very different for your particular code. So I'm creating a scatter plot. It's called XT graph. It's a new scatter plot example called position time graphs. I'm putting the window on top. I am packing. Remember, you have to pack a J-frame. So what that's telling it to do is basically arrange all the panels. I'm setting the initial size of the window. I'm saying what happens if you close the window. So I'm saying exit the program if the window is closed. And then I am making the window visible. Okay? So I'm going to compile it. And so one of the things I want to point out here is that if you look at the compile command, it's javac -class path JFreeChart jar. So I'm adding JFreeChart.jar to the class path and JCommon.jar to the class path. And then I'm running that on my code scatterplot.example. Okay, so that is what allowed it. So that this is called a wildcard. So this class path wildcard allowed the compiler to know what all these import statements mean. So then I'm going to run it. And I'm going to have to share my desktop here. Let's share my desktop. All right, so you should be able to see that. So you can see the window is titled Position Time Graphs. But then that looks really bad. I should have thought about this. Then it says the title of the graph was Position Time Graphs. You can see on the vertical axis I have position in meters. On the horizontal axis I have time in seconds. And I have this little legend at the bottom here that says the red squares, so it's automatically giving each series a different, I guess, a different mark on the graph so that we can identify the difference between the series. And so the red is going to be the accelerating, so we can see that the red looks like a parabola. Its slope is getting steeper. And then the constant velocity looks like a straight line. It only is showing 3 points because I think the other 2 points correspond with the accelerating graph. So that means that basically the red square is directly on top of the blue circle. Okay, so that's how that works. So it's actually pretty straightforward to do. So I thought that was nice. So I closed the window, so now the program exited with code 0, so that's a good thing. What if I had put, for example, the legend, what if I had put the legend to false? So let's see, how does that change it? And similarly, what if I maybe like commented out this part of the code? So I'm only going to add one series. I'm just going to add series 2. All right. So let's see how that works. Pilot. Run it. And so we can see, first of all, that I don't have the legend at the bottom. Okay. And secondly, all I have is series 2, which was the straight line graph, so I can see that this is a just a straight line graph. Okay. So let's see, we could add even more points if we wanted to. What if I added, you know, see how it's a loop that runs 5 times, so I'm only adding 5 points. If I wanted to, I could add 100 points. Let's do it. You know what? I'm going to actually, let's comment this one out. And let's add 100 points. Maybe not 100 points. Let's add 20 points to the accelerating graph. Let's try that. Let's run it. See, we can see that that's very clearly a parabola. So, you know, in my case, I have all the points are defined by a mathematical formula. You could have it where it's real data. So I know some of you are tracking progress versus time. You could have progress on one axis and then time on the other axis, something like that. So it could be nice. It could be really nice for your IA. All right. close down, Genie. So that is my lesson for today, and I will see you in the Zoom room. Bye for now.